So what is it that makes a classic or a muscle car significant? I mean, you might look at it like any muscle car that has a big engine and stripes and is of limited production is a significant car. But sometimes you find vehicles that hold personal significance, and that's what we're looking at here today. This is a 1971 Oldsmobile Cutlass S Convertible. It's not a 442, it's not even the 455 big V8 engine under the hood, it's a 350 car. However, the owner has had this car since 1973, and he brought it to us at the V8 Speed and Resto shop for a restoration. And we knew right away that this is a very significant car.
This is our new car, a 71 Oldsmobile Cutlass Supreme. We call it our little limousine, and that's what it is. The elegance of a limousine, but in a size and at a price that's right for us. The little limousine, with the General Motors mark of excellence.
When this car arrived, it was pretty typical of a well-worn early 70s Olds Cutlass. It's a convertible with a white top. It's got a white interior, but it has a bench seat. The exterior is green, and it was technically the original color, but it had been repainted. The car had pretty decent chrome. It's kind of a cruiser. It has a 350 under the hood, a turbo 350 automatic transmission, and nothing really special when it comes to performance upgrades or options. But the customer really likes this car, and he's had this a long, long time, almost 50 years when he brought it to us. So it really became a situation of reviving the car that he's known so long and doing it in a manner that doesn't deviate from what the car means to him, right? It would have been pretty easy to say, well, sure, we can put a 455 in this thing and a 4-speed and put some 442 stripes on it, maybe the outside air induction hood and a pedestal wing on the back and all that jazz. But that's not what he wanted. And you have to consider that people that have had a particular car for a long time that they really enjoy have a connection to that car. That car means something to them. They remember what it feels like to get behind the wheel of that big bench seat and grab that kind of thin steering wheel. And in his case, look out over that flat hood that does not have any hood scoops. But what he remembers is putting the top down and the sound of that engine and how it feels driving down the road. So over time, the car wears out, it gets rusty underneath, and the suspension wears out, and the engine loses power. And our daily drivers get better and better and better. So you can buy any, new to 5 or 6 or 10-year-old car today that is still nice and tight, and it doesn't squeak, and the steering is a lot tighter because the design is different, and they stop a lot better. So it's our job to determine what's most important to the customer and pick the elements from the new car experience of driving and the vintage experience of the memories and mesh them all together into something that looks and feels like it's supposed to, but performs better so that it doesn't feel like such a stretch from a modern car. Now, there are times when we do a very correct original restoration of a car where everything has to be exactly how it was. In this case, though, we wanted to kind of split the difference.
It looks good, man.
Now, overall, the car was not in terrible shape. There were a couple of pinholes in the floor. There was a few little pieces in the dash, a little mark in the trunk floor, and just a little bit of repair work that had to be done. But we weren't replacing entire floors on this car. We weren't replacing entire quarter panels. So that was nice. The fenders both had some work done to them in the past. It looked like there might have been a fender bender in the past. So we had to assess fixing those. But the doors also had some little rust holes here and there that we had to take care of. But overall, our mission was to reuse all the original sheet metal, and I think we were able to do that on this car. Once we repaired the floors, we made a panel and metal finished it, welded it in to make that firewall nice and clean. This platform is called the GM A body platform, and a lot of the pieces interchange with other GM A body products from different brands. So the Chevrolet A-body is the Chevelle. The Buick A-body is the Skylark. Pontiac A-body is the Le Mans GTO. So the beauty of all that is that the aftermarket has jumped on to make a lot of different parts for these cars that interchange, and especially when it comes to the suspension system. So we had our chassis completely disassembled and again media blasted. It got powder coated in a satin black, and we began to reassemble the chassis using some tubular suspension components from QA1. The advantage of using this type of suspension system is that the upper and lower control arms not only are made of a stronger material than the stamped steel originals, they have a modern urethane bushing in them that's greasable so they don't deflect and it's more of a precise drive. But they also have some revised geometry built into them, which means they track nice and straight going down the highway. We replaced the original steering box with a unit from Borgeson, which is a quicker ratio, so it feels much better than the original one. And for springs, we used a coil-over shock assembly. We like to put them together on the chassis, build the whole car, and then when all the components are installed on the car and it's at its maximum weight, that's when we'll go back and adjust the ride height, either change the spring out or adjust the spring on that coil-over shock. But it's nice to be able to dial everything in the way it's supposed to be. So this car drove in on its original 1971 Olds Rocket 350 V8 engine. But this one was starting to wear out and lose a little compression and puff a little smoke. But the owner didn't want a different engine, so we sent this one out to Fast Times Motor Works and had them go through it. They did some cleanup machine work on it, did a retrofit of a hydraulic roller camshaft, and then reassembled everything with new rings and pistons and bearings and checked all the clearances and made sure that it was all good to go, decked the block and the heads and assembled it and test ran it. And now we are fueling this with a Holley Terminator X fuel injection system taking place of the old carburetor. But in this case, we're ensured some peace of mind by doing a comp hydraulic roller cam, all ARP hardware inside. And then we ended up using the original transmission, had it rebuilt, Turbo 350 hydromatic transmission. It's an automatic 3-speed. We rebuilt the drive shaft and had it balanced. We also rebuilt the rear axle with new gears and a different limited slip differential unit and put bearings and everything all the way around. We also replaced all the brakes with new components, calipers, rotors, bearings, hoses, and then treated the entire car to all new lines, brake lines, fuel lines, emergency brake lines, all that good stuff, so that everything underneath is essentially brand new. Now, before we put the body back on the chassis, we did some body work on the firewall so that it looked really nice. We block sanded it and did some filler work and got that all dialed in. And then we did the same to the bottom of the car as well. We like these things to look nice on the bottom too. And then we treated everything to some seam sealer to make sure that those metal seams wouldn't hold any moisture and start rusting again. And then on the rotisserie in the paint shop, we shot the top side in a gray epoxy, and then the bottom also got a black industrial paint finish from the firewall all the way to the tail. And then the bottom side of the car was treated to a bed liner product to give it a polyurethane coating which resists stone chips and helps keep the noise down a little bit. And that is because this car is meant to be driven. So meanwhile, all those metalwork repairs were getting finished up on the body, and we put the body back on the chassis and started fitting up the panels so that we could see what kind of body work this car would require. And what we like to do at this stage is put the doors and the fenders and the hood and the deck lid on, and this is where we start to set all of the panel gaps. And this is the gap between the door and the quarter panel and the fender and the door and all that good stuff. And this car didn't fit terribly, but to make it as nice as we wanted it to turn out, we did redo all of the door edge gaps and the trunk edge gaps, adding material here and there, filing them, metal working them into shape so that there was a nice precise fit of all the panels. But we always want to make sure that the steel fits really nice and that our body work is done primarily just to refine that steel shape before it goes into primer and paint. So just before it goes into the bodywork stage, we test fit all the trim. I mean, many times we find people who go all the way to the end of a paint job with fresh paint and color and clear, and they polish the car out, and then they start fitting the trim on it, and it doesn't fit, and you're kind of stuck. So the earlier you can fit that stuff, the better. The bodywork process involves applying a skim coat of measured body filler across all the panels, and then block sanding it all off with a finer and finer grit process until most of it has been removed, but what's remaining just ensures straightness and crispness of all of the lines. And then the car gets sanded again with the sprayable polyester product. And this is like a spray-on body filler. Block sanding a car like this by hand takes some time, but it's the best way to make sure that all of the high and low spots are worked out, and it fills all those little sanding scratches that might exist from the previous round of body filler sanding. This car is going to be repainted in its original green color, maybe with a little trick or two. We'll have to see. Now the color on this car is 1971 lime green. It's an unusual color. I think it's a 1971 only. And the recipe to recreate this is not easy to find.
There was no formula, so we had to make it ourselves. As close as we could get it.
Our painter Jeff ended up brewing up a couple different variants and spraying out different spray out cards that we could look and compare to the original color and also to the taste of the owner, right? So I think the winner was based very much on that original color, but it has a little bit of gold in it and a little more pearl than it had when it was new. And when that gets covered with the clear, it just becomes super deep and a really neat color. So the first parts of the car to get color were the door jambs and the trunk jambs, and then the cowl area. And this was done so that these could be colored and cleared, and then we could start to put the body panels on to do the outside. Meanwhile, the body panels themselves got paint on the back sides and on the insides. So once all of those were in the green and in the clear and looking really sharp, we got really excited to see what this car was going to look like once the whole outside was the same color. We put all the sheet metal back on this car and did a final wet sand and masking and cleaning and all the work that's required to prepare it for a show car high quality paint job. By painting it together, we were guaranteed that all of the panels would match from panel to panel as far as their color, but also their metallic pattern. Now, Jeff is also very capable and has painted cars like this apart with no problem. But if you don't have to take that risk, why do it? Now, it's always very dramatic seeing a car change colors in the paint booth. After all the coats of green were sprayed and the clear was added, this car just looked amazing. We let it sit for a little while and then began the wet sanding and buffing process. And I think today we'll go 1,000 grit, 1,500, 2,000, I think we'll go up to 5,000 grit. And then we'll break out the polish compound and buff and polish the clear as well, which really makes it come to life. Now, we're always conscious that we don't take too much off because you've got an interesting dance to do because some of these paints don't allow for too much of a clear coat application. Sometimes you can't just put 25 coats of clear on it and sand it smooth and essentially use clear as body filler. So we always have to make sure that it's got enough clear on it so that we can sand and polish it, but then it also has enough after the polish so that down the line, if it needs a refresher in a few years or 10 years or whatever, there's still clear there to be polished. And then the car went into reassembly mode, where we started to put it all back together. So the original seats were disassembled all the way down to the frames. Then they got media blasted, and sometimes we have to reclip them or replace sections of spring and weld things together. We have the luxury of being able to make our seat covers if we choose in-house. In this case, we were able to obtain some that were a good reproduction and worked out pretty well in that pearl white color, which is just a stunning color. We also reupholstered the door panels on the insides, the rear side panels, and of course new carpeting. Everywhere that you'd come into contact with the car needs to be as fresh and crisp as the outside. So the convertible top assembly was removed and it was stripped of all paint and corrosion, and bushings were replaced, and the weather strip was replaced. The top frame was painted black and restored to like new condition. And then new hydraulic pistons were installed, new lines, top motor. The new convertible top is white like the original one, which looks outstanding in contrast to that pearl green. All of the electrics were replaced, all of the dash wiring, all the light wiring from front to back. So everything is new inside the car. The dashboard is amazing. We had the original gauges restored, and then we refitted those with all LED lighting, which at the end really made the car look great. A new face for the dash, and all bright plating was done. So it looks beautiful. I mean, like the dashboard looks brand new. And meanwhile, the exterior trim started to go back on the car, the bumpers and some of the side trim, the grills and the headlights and all that jazz. And piece by piece, everything started coming back together. One of the things that's very special on this car are the wheels. And I gotta say, when I heard the plan for the wheel initially, I honestly wasn't quite on board, just because I didn't get it. But this was motivated by the owner, and he had a great idea looking back. So when this car was new, it had a 14-inch wire hubcap with a little Oldsmobile rocket emblem in the middle in red, and a white pinstripe tire. And those hubcaps, for those of us who grew up in the 70s and 80s, I remember these things always just not looking nice. They were too small, being these little 14s, but they looked to be of low quality, and they always made noise going down the road. They would whistle and squeak, and they were really super hard to clean, and they tarnished, and they were clearly not a wire wheel, but they were just a hubcap, and it is what it is. But the owner decided, hey, why don't we get a real set of wire wheels for this car in chrome plated, and then have a custom rocket emblem put on the center of the wheel cap, right? So the wheels are a Dayton wire wheel that are 17-inch diameter, and they're a true knockoff design. So it doesn't have any lug nuts. It bolts onto the spindle with a locking nut. And the owner had this idea to have a rocket emblem 3D printed based on the original design, chrome plated, and then painted with red jeweler's enamel. And that went right on the center of that locking nut. And it was wrapped in a white pinstripe tire. And I gotta tell you that once I saw the wheels and tires installed on the car, I was floored. Because gone was any recollection of the cheesy wire hubcaps. But this wasn't a wire wheel that looked to be overdone. It looks so right on the car. And I think it's a combination of all the plating on the car, the white top, the white interior, the bright green, and the fact that it's not a 442, so it doesn't have any stripes or anything. It's just a classy looking, fairly glamorous car, I guess is the best way to describe it. And the stance is right on. It sits down just a little bit, and the wheel and tire orientation in the wheel well. It looks dynamite. And everybody who saw it, they were like, oh, you're putting wire wheels on that thing? You know? And then when they see it, they're like, oh my gosh, this is the right wheel for this car. So it even has me thinking about a set for one of my own personal cars. I mean, honestly, it was a wonderful occurrence to see something look as good as it did. So we were very happy with that. When the whole project was said and done, the car looked amazing. It's different in many ways from a lot of things we do. It's a 350 powered Oldsmobile Cutlass. Again, not a 442. It's got a single exhaust, the wire wheels, a basic stock appearance, but it's so nice. It drives wonderfully. It's nice and smooth, but that QA1 suspension allows it to handle really tight. It's like a modern car, you know. It doesn't squeak or rattle. The top's not shaking. The windows aren't clattering, you know. Any of those things that we associate with, you know, an old worn out convertible or how it was when it came in. It makes great power. The fuel injection is nice and reliable. You turn the key and it starts. The LED dash lighting is unreal. It is such a simple thing, but when you have gauges that are fresh and crisp and the lenses aren't all cloudy and the numbers aren't all gummed up, and to light them up with that LED, I stared at it for about an hour. I mean, I darn near killed the battery just looking at the dash lights. It's amazing. So you have all these little experiences with this car that make you smile. You know, you approach it and you see this green and the sun. It's like, wow. And then you see the wheels and you're like, yeah, right on. And then you get in, it's comfortable, and the wheel feels good, and the dash looks great, and you turn those headlights on and the gauges come to life, and you turn the key and it just lights right off, and it drives so nice. It's a home run. It just makes you smile. And for me, I'm not the guy that's owned this thing for 50 years, but I'm super attached to it now. You know, I can't even imagine, you know, how much he likes it. So that's the great thing, is we sent it back to the owner, and he really digs it, and it's part of his world, and it's never going away. And we were just super honored to be the ones to bring it, not only bring it back around, but bring it to another level, but kind of a different level than where a lot of cars go. You know, the urge to really modify it was resisted, and instead that energy went into making everything that it needs to have, it's got, and it's all done to a top level degree. So, what is a significant car to you? Do you have one that needs to be restored or modified or brought back like our Oldsmobile? We'd love to talk to you about it. We do a lot of these cars, and every one of them is special and significant, and we understand that. You can reach us at v8speedshop.com. Feel free to check out all the build photographs of this beautiful 71 Cutlass Supreme Convertible. There's a lot of them, and we're happy to answer questions and maybe work with you on adding a whole nother level of significance to your special car.